Those in suffering cannot enter heaven. By Xuefeng, suffering is a disease of consciousness. If one feels suffering, it is a sign of being in the wrong. The sources of suffering are multifaceted. The suffering of birth, aging, illness, and death, the suffering of not getting what one wants, the inability to let go, suffering from being bullied by others, betrayal by friends, the burden of car and mortgage loans, the inability to become an official or get rich, the lack of fame, being quarantined at home without enough food, the struggle for power, imprisonment, being robbed, being cuckolded, failing to fulfill wishes, experiencing disasters. The sources of suffering are endless and bottomless. If suffering is met with more suffering, there is no end to it. Heaven does not welcome anyone who often feels suffering. It only welcomes those who often feel happy and joyful. Thus, one must seek to escape from suffering to find joy. If we believe that all suffering comes from the external world, from others, or from nature, then our suffering will be endless. No matter how hard we try or how much we cry to the heavens, suffering will still accompany us. Suffering stems from our consciousness. If we feel suffering, it indicates a problem with our consciousness. It means our consciousness is ill. Suppose you were placed in heaven now. If we do not change our diseased consciousness, even in heaven, we would still experience endless suffering. Suppose our consciousness is perfect and healthy. Even if we were in so-called hell, we would not feel suffering. In this sense, we are in heaven at this very moment. If we feel life is unbearable, it's because our consciousness is in hell. For example, if you fall in love with someone of the opposite sex and possess her, how would you feel if you discovered she had been with another man? Would you feel suffering? If you feel suffering, the problem lies in your own consciousness, your hellish consciousness, which causes your suffering. This kind of consciousness, even in heaven, would still create suffering for oneself. Suffering can be material, mental, or spiritual. Material suffering is primarily physical pain. Mental suffering mainly comes from emotional pain. Spiritual suffering arises from one's views on life, values, life itself, and the world. For most people, mental suffering surpasses both material and spiritual suffering. If we fail to recognize that all suffering originates from our erroneous consciousness, then our lives will be enveloped in suffering. No matter how many times we are reborn over thousands of years, we will still live in suffering and cannot possibly reach heaven. The root of erroneous consciousness comes from ego attachment, broadly speaking, always believing oneself to be right and others wrong. Insisting on one's rightness over others' wrongness leads to erroneous consciousness. Failing to realize this is called being obstinately ignorant. Therefore, everyone should be aware that attributing one's suffering to external factors and not reflecting on oneself while always blaming and condemning others is called being obstinately ignorant. Once one is obstinately ignorant and refuses to take the medicine, the illness becomes incurable. October 13th, 2022.